Hello everyone, welcome back to the Zach F1 channel, coming right back at you with another F1 fantasy video for Spain. I hope you are all doing really well and I hope you enjoy this video. Now, my last week team, let's not talk about that. Wasn't the best, however, we pushed through for a better result in Spain. And then before we get into the video, remember to like and subscribe, follow my Twitter for more F1 Fantasy updates, join my Discord and join my league. Maybe we could get to 1,000 before the cutoff period, who knows, we'll see. However, let's get straight into the video. So first off, it would be very weird not to speak about them in the key points, and that is if Mercedes is the right choice. Now, they're now 21.9 million. They're still very much a good constructor to have. Now, will Canada be a one-off? Probably. Still won't be terrible. They'll still be a little bit behind Ferrari, a little bit behind McLaren, a little bit behind Red Bull. They'll still be there, but I don't see them getting podiums next weekend. So it very much is Mercedes still going into the future is more of a budget building team for if you need to focus on getting some more budget. Now, is it a bad option? No, as they should still be both getting top 8 performances, Russell and Hamilton. And if they're back to what they used to be like, then they'll probably get fastest lap as well. They'll be faster than the Astons, they'll be faster than the V-Carbs. So that won't be an issue. It's just podium positions where you get most of the points, driver of the days. I can't see Mercedes getting anytime soon, especially as it does look like Ferrari will have a bit of a resurgence back going into Spain. So McLaren, Red Bull, Ferrari should be back to the normal pecking order, with Mercedes close behind. So you could get Hamilton getting into the top 4, maybe getting a podium result in qualifying, however probably dropping back down a little bit. So be careful of Mercedes, however budget wise still a very good option, and by all accounts a team and 2 drivers to keep an eye on over the next week as we see the practice results. Now, I think the biggest news we need to think about F1 fantasy wise is Sergio Perez, as he has a 3-place grid penalty for Spain. Now, there's a lot of risk choosing Perez. He hasn't finished the last 2 races. He hasn't had a good performance basically since Miami. And there's a lot of questions about Perez's ability to perform in F1 Fantasy right now. However, we know, like Ocon last weekend, penalties are really good for F1 Fantasy. Now, I would still not go for him because he's too much of a risk. However, if you want someone who's a differential and you know they've got a penalty going in, so they should be getting a few more overtakes than where they qualify, especially in a Red Bull, he's not the best driver, we know. However, there are points to be made there. It's up to you if you want to take the risk. Personally, I wouldn't, but it definitely needs to be spoken about. Then we go on to the best drivers under 8.1 million, and that would be Sargent, Bottas, Zhou and Albon. All of those 4 drivers are the drivers under 8.1 million. The reason I've done 8.1 million is to fit in Albon, as I think he doesn't really fit into the mid-level drivers now, as there's such a gap to Albon to the rest of them. However, we'll go from worst to best, and it has to be said, Sargent is probably the worst driver now to have under 8.1 million. He's so dirt cheap, and I do love how cheap he is. He's one of those drivers where if you really need to focus on the rest of your team, fair enough, put him in, but at the minute it's basically negative points guaranteed. He can't finish a race, and even when he does, he seems to still get negative points because he'll spin out or go into the gravel, then have to come back out. It's not looking very good for Sargent, especially as he might lose his seat as well coming into the next few races if he's not careful with his results. So I do now think Sargent probably is the worst driver to have in F1 Fantasy, cheap driver wise. Then we go on to Bottas, 8 million. Like I said, I thought he was too expensive at 7.5 million. I still stand by the point where he's not one of those drivers you really want to have. In the Sauber, he over qualifies and normally tends to drop down a bit. Obviously in the chaos that was the Canadian Grand Prix and them starting in the pit lane, the Saubers, it didn't really work out like that. However, I could very much see Bottas qualifying 13th, 14th and just dropping down to 18th, 19th by the end of the race in a few races to come. So I really would pick Bottas as a final resort. Then we go on to the 3rd best driver, which is Zhou Guanyu. Again, nothing's changed about what I said from him last time. Great overtakes, great positions gained. Even in a Canadian Grand Prix where he was literally nowhere, he still went up 0.5 million in transfer value. He's a really good driver to have. Unlike Bottas, he will qualify 19th, 20th, depending where Sargent is. But because of that, he will normally get positions gain points and just get enough points to finish the race, go up 0.5 million, and that's all you need from a cheap driver like Zhou. But then by far the best driver in this category is Alex Albon. The reason I put him here is because he's such a bargain driver now. At 8.1 million, he went down 0.2 million from Canada, But we need to take Canada with a pinch of salt, as he potentially could have got points there, and he got taken out by Sainz. He would have got 8 points if you just take off the -20, but I really do believe he would have got the overtake and the position gain points from overtaking Sainz when he spun, and I really do think he could have got into the points, which would have been incredible for Albon and Williams, and he probably would have got 10 plus points in Canada, which would have been a 0.5 million increase. So Albon 100% is someone not to be not looking at, and I really do think cheap driver wise, he's the best option out there. Now going into the best drivers under 10.2 million, which is like the mid cheap driver levels, and we start off with the worst of best drivers as per usual, and we start off with Daniel Ricciardo. Realistically, Daniel Ricciardo's the only driver, if I saw in a team, I'd be a little bit worried. I mean, even in a race like Canada, where he qualified 5th, he dropped down to 8th. He still didn't get many overtakes, which really hampered his points. He only got 9 points by the end of it, and that was his best weekend on F1 Fantasy this season so far. Because yes, he got 16 points in the sprint race, but that's basically divide by 2. 8 points for each race. I still think 9 points isn't good enough to be your best result, as there's so many better options elsewhere. So Daniel Ricciardo is the only driver I would still steer clear of, especially as when he qualifies high, he can't really do what Tsunoda does and keep that position. He normally does tend to lose quite a few. Now, I should mention the rest of the list going forward for the mid-cheap driver level are all good options, because all of these drivers, there is an order of who's better. However, it is pretty close in my opinion. Now, the worst option is Esteban Ocon. Obviously, he doesn't have that penalty, which everyone was loving in Canada, which really did help him. And I think, yes, he did get a lot of points in Canada. Again, the chaos really did help him. He could have got more if he didn't let Gasly pass as well. But at 10.2 million, he's just too expensive, because his teammate, Gasly, 9.1 million, who still isn't the best option as a mid-level cheap driver option. However, Gasly gives you the same performance, 14 points to 16 points, and he's 1 million cheaper. Now, if you've got the room to go up to Ocon and you've got nowhere else to improve your team, fair enough. But I think overall, Gasly's a cheaper driver, which really helps. Alpine look all right, so it's okay. But still, I would prefer a VCARB driver and a Haas driver over both of them. Hülkenberg is up next on the list. Same as usual, basically, where he qualifies too well. And a bit like Ricciardo, when he qualifies too well in that Haas, he normally can't hold on that well. He can hold on for like 11th or 12th, which isn't the best though. You want to have those drivers who qualify lower and then push up. Now, he had a great weekend, obviously, in Canada because of the wet overtakes he made. However, take away those points, and it was an okay weekend. But he's not a driver I would be licking my lips over. He's a good option, but there are definitely better options elsewhere. And then again, these two are the best options. We'll start off with Tsunoda, because he is dropping down to 2nd place this weekend now in this category. But he's just so consistent with points. Now, he got 0 points in Canada. It was a shame. He made a mistake, but he was fighting for points. On track for a 0.5 million increase again. But this is how some things go. He made a mistake, dropped down to 14th, and then got 0 points. He would have scored 8 to 10 points, which would have been very good. So I'm not too worried about Tsunoda. He's one of the most consistent drivers out there, F1 Fantasy-wise. That's why I really like having him, because most of the time, he will get you decent points. And he is one of the only drivers who can qualify high, stick in that position, and when he pits and stuff, make some overtakes, get a few more points. So he's just all in all a great package to have for F1 Fantasy. By far the best driver to have at the minute is Kevin Magnussen. He's just so amazing right now. Now, again, like Hülkenberg, a lot of his Canadian points came off the wet overtakes he made. However, he's just consistently getting so many overtakes. He's one of the most aggressive drivers on the grid. But sometimes, and most of the time, that really does help his points. So obviously, you don't get penalised for penalties, which Magnussen gets a few. So if Magnussen's just overtaking people, getting a lot of overtake points, it works out better. And that's what he always does. He qualifies not amazingly, normally around 14th to 17th, 18th, and then makes it up though. So Kevin Magnussen by far probably is the best option, 9.9 million. I would have him in my team if you could. Now, going into no man's land, you have the Aston Martin drivers. Basically, Stroll is still a very good option. We saw a 1 million increase in Canada, 14.2 million now. I would say you could have him for the next 2 races until he meets that threshold of 15 million to be not considered a cheap driver anymore and would be considered on the level of the Russells, the Piastris, Leclerc. I know, crazy. So until he gets that point, he's still a very good option that I would consider, especially for like cheap teams where anyone with under 110 million budget, where you can't afford to go up to a better driver. And then Alonso is definitely another no-go driver, as he's not getting you those dramatic price increases that we would like to see, and in an Aston Martin at 16.7 million, he's sort of just in no man's land. He's not helping you budget-wise, he's not really helping you points-wise. It's only really necessary to have him in if you physically can't bring in another premium driver who's better. Now, talking about premium drivers, let's go through worst to best which drivers you should pick. Now, for me, the worst premium driver still to choose would be George Russell. Now, I know he's the cheapest, and it can all change depending on how your team looks. However, 20.8 million and probably the worst option out of the Mercedes three options of Mercedes as constructor, Hamilton and Russell. Very much prefer Hamilton as a driver. Russell makes a few too many mistakes, and yes, he did have a good Canada getting 27 points. However, I doubt he's going to be qualifying pole position every weekend, and I still think if he even qualified in the top 3, he would drop down exactly like what happened in Canada. Now, second worst would be Perez. Like I said, he's not the worst this weekend. He would be normally. However, just because of that penalty, just because of the potential that's there, I can't put him last. So keep an eye out for Perez. If he looks good, it could be a decent option. However, I'd highly doubt that due to his recent performances. Then we have Carlos Sainz, the first of the Ferrari drivers. He's a decent option, being like a middle ground value for the premium drivers. However, he's a worse option than Leclerc, and he looks like he's a worse option than both McLarens and Hamilton, so I'd sort of steer clear. Again, we saw he can crack under a bit of pressure, being the only Ferrari left. He spun out, caused Albon to have a bad race as well. I just don't think he has it anymore. He's a decent option, but not an option I'd be 2-timesing, not an option getting fastest lap or driver of the day. So at the end of the day, he's not the best premium driver to have. Then we move on to the premium drivers that I would say if anyone had these in your team, you'd be sitting pretty. And the first one is Lewis Hamilton, mainly because he tends to get fastest lap quite a lot. And in that Mercedes, normally he can't get his tyres fully heated up. He doesn't do that well in qualifying. However, he'll qualify like 8th, 9th, and then move up to like a 5th place, a 4th place, and get quite a few points from that. And with fastest lap as well, it's normally pretty decent. We can see from his last few results, he's a driver that I wouldn't say is bad to have in your team. Then you have Oscar Piastri, the first of the McLarens. McLaren look very consistent. They look like the most consistent team right now, points-wise, where most weekends in and out, they'll be around the first to third fastest car, which is sort of a nice thing to know. Now, Piastri, he seems like he's always a bit behind Norris, so he's never really in contention for driver of the day or fastest lap. However, a consistent driver always getting around 20 points is what you want from at least a second premium driver who's pretty cheap as well. And then onto the top 3 premium drivers, which would start with Charles Leclerc. Second most obvious for driver of the day. If Ferrari look good on their day, he will be getting it. If McLaren look good, it'll be Norris sort of thing. However, take out Canada for instance, and this guy's been doing amazing this season. Very much one to look out for, especially with his 0.5 million decrease to his value. Right now would be a pretty good time to jump on that bandwagon and get back onto Ferrari, at least with Leclerc, and see what they can do in Spain. Now, of course, like all of the premium drivers though, take everything with a pinch of salt, as practice is going to be the most key thing to be looking at, as we found out in Canada quite a lot. However, for now, Leclerc still seems like a very good option. Then we have Max Verstappen, second place. Definitely by far the most consistent driver to have as a 2-times option maximum. He's always going to get you 30 plus points. He's most likely going to get a win. He's most likely going to get the pole position. And even if he doesn't, he gets overtakes and stuff. Now, he'll never really get fastest lap or driver of the day. He will get 30 plus points, which is very good. No other driver you can consistently say will get you over 30 plus points without the extra add-ons. So it's a beautiful driver. He's quite expensive. However, if you've got the team value to get him in and another second premium driver, you're sitting pretty. Then we move on to the best driver you can have who is a premium driver, which would be Lando Norris. He's just over the threshold, so he's not good for budget value increases. However, points-wise, he normally gets driver of the day. That means he beats Verstappen in most cases. He's got the most points of any driver in the 2 of the 3 last races, bar Monaco, and that wasn't either Verstappen, that was Leclerc. It really is a no-brainer that Norris is the driver you really want to have in your team. And then quickly, before team selections, we obviously have to go through best constructors, and the top 3 have slightly changed since Canada. The top 3 would be McLaren, Ferrari still as the best 2, with Mercedes coming in. Obviously, Mercedes are sort of like the dark horse now. We never really know where they're going to be these days. However, budget building wise very good, and points wise still get you similar points to McLaren and Ferrari. The team that's a little bit of an issue right now that I would probably steer clear of is Red Bull, purely because you don't get any budget building from them, and points wise they might not even be the best points, because yeah, they equal Ferrari and McLaren on points because of fastest pit stops. However, if you're using quite a bit of your money to get up to Red Bull, you want them to be doing more than the Ferraris and the McLarens. And if they're not, it's not worth it. And that's all because of Perez. We really have to hope, if you have Red Bull, that Perez just does his job, which he can't do at the minute. But that is why Red Bull I'm a little bit iffy with right now. So let's now talk about the team selections you could use. Now, starting off, for everyone who's had an amazing start to the season, who has over 126.2 million, so that's a select few. However, I'll still do a team for you peeps. The team builds around Verstappen, Norris, Ferrari, and McLaren. You get the 2 best premium drivers and the 2 best constructors realistically you can have. And this team would just do you fantastic. Yeah, you have to kind of skimp out on the cheap drivers, which is why you could also drop Norris to Leclerc, increase a Bottas to the likes of Albon, and then Zhou up to a Hulkenberg if you've got a little bit of money to play around with. And it's just one of those things where I think if you can get Verstappen and any second premium driver in with a Ferrari and McLaren, then you are sitting pretty. So that's basically anyone who has over 120 odd million in the bank. You could move over to, yes, having really bad cheap drivers. However, at that point, the cheap drivers wouldn't matter too much, considering you could have someone like Verstappen and Piastri, Verstappen and Sainz, Verstappen and Hamilton, Verstappen and Russell. And you could also have Verstappen and Alonso. However, I wouldn't really go that far. If you're dropping down to Alonso to have Verstappen, I would probably then stick with having a Norris or Leclerc, because that is the next team up next. Now, for us mere mortals in a land of people with budgets over 126 million, this is more like a team you would normally see. The Leclerc Norris teams. Now, the cheapest team you could have with this is 118.6 million. So still not the cheapest team, but I know a lot of people have over 118.6 million, and this is the building block for this team. Now, if you've got a little bit more money to spend, you could increase Sargent to Hulkenberg, Bottas to Albon, Zhou to Tsunoda, and then finally finishing off the team with Tsunoda to K-Mag. Now, at that point, you need 123.9 million. So in my opinion, the Verstappen with a second premium driver like Piastri with 3 cheaper drivers would be better than this. However, if you still want the Norris and Leclerc with better cheap drivers, then this would be something you would like. Now moving down to cheaper teams would be a team that I'm sort of running, as I've got around 116 million, 117 million in the bank, which would look like this. Now, the Leclerc and Piastri team is a very good option. It starts at 114.4 million. Again, this is your base build for this with Zhou, Bottas and Sargent, but it's the exact same thing with the other team, just with 2 different premium drivers, where you do the exact same increases to your drivers. So Bottas to Albon, Sargent to Hulkenberg, Zhou to Tsunoda, and Tsunoda to Magnussen. With the best teams out of the way, let's talk about some budget teams you can use as well, because we're getting to the point where we need to be thinking about points a lot. However, if you're falling behind on budget, you're going to be not getting as much as the Verstappen and second premium driver teams, and that will really lock you out of a lot of points for the next few races, which would really hurt your season. So you could build a team that looks very similar to this. So if you were on a budget building team, you could run something like this for 116.6 million. Now, it's a very good team. Of course, you have Leclerc, Hamilton, Tsunoda, Albon, Magnussen with Ferrari and Mercedes. They're basically all the drivers that look most likely to increase by 0.5 million to 1 million, and constructors who are most likely to increase by 1 million each race. Now, Hamilton, for me, you could have Piastri instead. However, Hamilton's more of a driver where he could get 10 to 15 points. However, he could get 30 points, whereas Piastri is more consistent around the 20 points, which is good points-wise, but not budget-wise, as you could be getting Hamilton moving up 1 million a lot more often than Piastri. Now, the issue is this team is around the same value as a lot of the Leclerc-Piastri teams with McLaren and Ferrari, which probably would get you quite a few more points on a normal weekend, not Canada. So it is quite a risk for anyone, again, in that little band of points where you're in the switchover area and you don't really know which team to go for. If you don't have enough money for 116.6 million, you could easily drop Tsunoda down to a Hulkenberg, K-Mag to Tsunoda, and then Hulkenberg down to Sargent if you really need to save a lot of money to get a team like this. But I really do think this is one of the better teams to get you back into the budget scoring positions, because these are the teams that could get you the 1 million or 0.5 million increases, which you really need, especially if you're around 110 to 115 million in price range, as you're really getting locked out of a lot of good teams. And then the final teams you need to consider for anyone who has less than 110 million, this team's actually 110.1 million, but it's the best probably team you could get for your money. And it is a team with Leclerc, Stroll, Hülkenberg, Tsunoda, Magnussen, Mercedes and Ferrari. Again, it's very much a budgety building sort of team, as you want to be able to unlock those better teams to get more points down the line, and you're still getting good teams. Mercedes is still a good constructor, Ferrari's a good constructor, Leclerc probably the best 2-times driver in that premium option, below 25 million, because you could have a Norris, you could have Verstappen, but it's really not going to help in the long run. Now, Stroll, purely because instant 0.5 million, like I've been saying, again, Hülkenberg should get a 0.5 million, Tsunoda and Magnussen should follow as well. And then it's just as simple as this for anyone who needs to clear some money if they can't afford a team like this. You could drop Stroll down to Ocon, Ocon down to Gasly, and then Gasly down to Albon. And then for anyone who still needs a bit more money, you could drop K-Mag down to Gasly, and then Gasly down to Zhou. But those are all the teams I would probably keep an eye on for this weekend. They're all pretty decent teams. Like I said, not much Red Bull being displayed. Like I said, it's not the best constructor to have right now because of how unreliable Perez is. However, I hope these team selections helped all of you out there. Now, chip-wise, it's pretty easy what I have to say about this. Again, no sprint weekend. I don't think it's going to rain. It's most likely not going to be a chip. Again, limitless, you want to use it at sprint race weekend. Extra DRS, sprint race weekend. No negative, a rainy race or a sprint race weekend. And it's the same case of most cases. Final fix, again, I'll talk about on my live stream before the actual race, because yes, there could be a few final fixes depending on what happens, unless you've used it before. And again, wildcard really depends on where your team is right now. So let's go have a look at my league. So thank you all for joining the Zach F1 League. We have 719 people in it right now. I'll put the link up right on the screen and the link in the description for anyone who wants to join. I will give a top 5 shout out. Just remember, top 5 are in a £200 prize pool. So first place £75, second place £50, third place £35, fourth place £30, fifth place £25, and that is in Great British pounds, probably around 250, 230, 250 American dollars. So here are the top 5 shout outs. So you have Colt Viet flat out. Congratulations, 2,422, a really good weekend for you. 263 points, smashed it out of the park with the triple Mercedes option with McLaren. Congratulations. Hashtag one paddock, here I come. Again, a decent weekend, 157. Dropped down to second, but still very much in it to win it. 2,366 points. And then you have Leapers One, another prominent team that's always popping up. 235 points last weekend, 2,337 points this season. Then you have Jetto F1, a new driver into the top 5, I believe. Congratulations. And then we have, sorry for the pronunciation, Enamoda G with 2,329 points. Congratulations to all of you, and I really hope all of you keep up the good work. But anyway, that is all from me today. I hope you all could take something from this video and use it to improve and help your teams. So thank you all so much for watching. I'll be back this week for another F1 related video, and I'll be live streaming before the deadline, before quali, and before the race to go over any final fix or just going over what could happen before the race for F1 Fantasy. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Love you all, and I'll see you all in another episode. Bye bye.